Let's talk about the Israelites' hair. Hair is a very descriptive physical trait. It is not discussed much because it is so descriptive. But listen, God gave the children of Israel instructions concerning taking the vow of a Nazarite in Numbers 6, verses 2 through 5. Speak to the Israelites and tell them that if a man or woman makes a special vow, the vow of a Nazarite, to separate himself to the Lord, he is to abstain from wine and strong drink. He must not drink vinegar made from wine or strong drink, and he must not drink any grape juice or eat fresh grapes or raisins all the days of his separation. He is not to eat anything that comes from the grapevine, not even the seeds or skins. In verse 5, for the entire period of his vow of separation, no razor shall pass over his head. He must be holy until the time of his separation to the Lord is complete. He must let the hair of his head grow long. Now, there are many ways to manipulate any hair texture to go against what is natural and form it into dreadlocks, as it is a style nowadays, just as we can manipulate our hair to be straight. But when God was instructing his people in the book of Numbers about taking the vow of a Nazarite, the first time we see the word Nazarite in the Bible, he said to let, L-E-T, the locks of the hair of his head grow. This is simply not combing or cutting the hair and letting this happen on its own. The emphasis is not so much on the locks as it is not cutting or combing their hair and letting it grow naturally. Locks just happen to be the result of letting the hair grow with no interference at all. The hair texture pictured here is the only hair texture that will lock or mat up, M-A-T-T-E, only by not combing or cutting. God would not instruct his people to do something he knew they could not do. This was also the hair texture of the Israelites: Samson, Samuel, Ezekiel, King Solomon, and most likely John the Baptist and Jesus, just to name a few. Dreadlocks or locks are mentioned 10 times in the King James Bibles. Numbers 6, 5, Judges 16, 13, Judges 16, 19, Song of Solomon 4, verse 1, 4, verse 3, 5, verse 2, 5, verse 11, 6, verse 7, Isaiah 47, verse 2, and Ezekiel 44, verse 20. Read these, especially the Song of Solomon ones where the locks are described as bushy and black as raven. The verse in Isaiah is actually referring to Babylon and the Chaldeans, in which Abraham's family came from Ur of the Chaldeans, Genesis 11, verse 28 and 31. So this means the ancient Chaldeans' hair was the type to lock or mat up to, which further proves the saying true that the ancient Chaldeans were black. Abraham's family came from a place inhabited by black people. Now, these are only the men actually mentioned. Who knows who all had locks that were not mentioned by name in Scripture? Also, some argue that the Jews of today, as in the ones who controlled Israel, have curly or nappy hair. To argue a point that so-called Africans, Hebrews are not the only people whose hair will lock up. Listen, let's be clear of two things. It's so, some argue that the Jews of today, as in the ones who control Israel, have curly or nappy hair, to argue a point that so-called Africans, Hebrews, are not the only people whose hair will lock up. Listen, let's be clear of two things. If you have nappy hair, you have African in your bloodline somewhere, whether you want to admit it or not. Anybody's welcome to prove me wrong on this, but you'd better come up with proof. Let me clarify something. The Hebrews of the Bible were what we call Africans by ethnicity. The term Hebrew denotes descendants of Abraham or a family. I know we have been taught that the Hebrews were a different race, but please understand that in the Bible, Hebrew was not an ethnicity that was taught to us in error. Truth is original information, and you must look at the past with past eyes. Interpreting the past solely on present mindset is backwards and will lead you astray. If you want to know what is true, we have to go back to the original information. We are discussing the truth of the ancient biblical Israelites and their hair from the Bible. And all Scripture lands the biblical Israelites as so-called Africans, having nappy, bushy, woolly, etc. hair that will naturally lock up if not cut or combed. Not Africans as in sons of Ham, of course. The Israelites are not Hamites. This is also explained in our article titled Noah and His Three Sons. Our children are even doing this now, not combing their hair and letting it lock up. This only happens with so-called African hair. No other hair texture on earth fits this tail description. So, it concerns me when people try to include other ethnic groups as being Israelites because they were persecuted, i.e. Native Americans, Hispanics, etc., but they just don't fit the physical descriptions of the Hebrews given in the Bible. Much love and respect to them and the struggle. But it's not fair to them if it's not true. If they are saying they have African Hebrew ancestry, that's a different conversation. And Jacob, Israel, having 12 sons of not one or two, but 12 different ethnicities? Think about that. It's confirmed nowhere in Scripture or history that 12-tribe chart theory just don't hold water on a few levels. Also, the terms locks and dreadlocks refer to the exact same type of hairstyle. The term dread originated from Rastafarianism, which was born in the 1930s in Jamaica when Haile Selassie, whose birth name was Tafari Makonnen, Ras is translated as head, was crowned emperor of Ethiopia. When the emperor was forced into exile during an invasion, guerrilla warriors made a vow not to cut their hair until the emperor was reinstated. The movement was seen as a threat and came under attack by the authorities that tried to suppress the Rasta movement. The warriors made it clear that they had a dread, D-R-E-A-D, fear or respect for God. Hence the term dread, D-R-E-A-D, which was later reclaimed by the Rasta R-A-S-T-A, community. These dreads, capital D-R-E-A-D-S, grew matted locks of hair, which would become known to the world as dreadlocks, the hairstyle of the dreads. The hairstyle was later brought into mainstream culture through the worldwide success of reggae artist Bob Marley. Sporting locks himself, he prompted an international interest in the style and the anti-establishment philosophy of Rastafarian culture. Another writer went on to say concerning dreadlocks, add to that the fact that black hair texture is the most conducive to the locking process, and one can easily deduce its dreadlocks origin. But we must understand that in the Bible, locks was not a style. The point was to not disturb your hair at all. No manipulation at all. Just let it grow. The result is locks. Only for people with naturally nappy, N-A-P-P-Y, hair. To learn more about this amazing hair, watch the video below titled, What is Good Hair? So proper research of history will point to only one ethnicity on earth who truly fit the descriptions of the people of the book, better known as the biblical Israelites. And we haven't even discussed the curses and prophecies, but you cannot skip the physical descriptions of the people. This is very simple. Physical descriptions are always the first identifier. If you are really searching for what is truth, happy studies, history. Concerning the Bible, incorrect history will produce incorrect theology. By Minister Rodney Jones, specializing in biblical history.